Stone Guardian, Crystal Keeper, Gin lovers and rock hounds. Welcome to There's a Rock for That.
You could join us today.
Well, thanks, Mary. It's really great to be here with you.
Well, I'm so excited, and I know the book is out now, right? And available from, your regular retail booksellers, right? It's already out.
Yeah. I think, I know it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent booksellers or bookstores.
Awesome. And this is called Travelers, out from Roundfire Books, distributed by John Hunt Publishing. And it's fiction. And I think that you're more associated with, why did you want to write this story? What inspired you?
Yeah, this story is so different from the other work that I've done. I've done a lot of nonfiction books around mindfulness, and I felt I just really wanted to reach people and bring them into the world of a psychiatric unit. And I've worked in psychiatric
to bring people in.
Yeah. And I've worked in that field for many years. And I wanted to tell the story of how sometimes I feel like mental health just puts people in boxes, and it gives them a diagnosis, and it sees us in a more mechanical way. And so I wanted to kind of help people get out of that box. Yeah. View things differently and share a story. Also, it's a story about overcoming grief and transcendental types of realities.
Yes. And I kind of feel like at the heart of it, there's also a love story going on, between Ben and his wife. And, was that, it's the difficult parts of love, when things aren't going so great, when we've gone through a tragedy, and how that impacts, and really getting inside that, I thought was really, really kind of interesting, because I feel like a lot of times, everything
Kind of, it's breaking up there, Mary. I couldn't hear you. Hello, it's the screen is frozen.
It's a very, accessible and relatable story of two people who went through something together.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is very much has that love story part of it. You can see that they've been very close, but they've lost their daughter. And because of this, I don't want to give away any any spoilers of the story, but it's driven a wedge between them. And so the wife, she wants to keep her name's Beth, and she wants to keep the daughter's room just as it is when she passed away. Whereas he wants to kind of he can't deal with it. He wants to move on. He wants it to change. And so they're unable to really come together, because they're both experiencing the grief in different ways. And that's really important, is kind of trying to respect how someone else might experience that. And so he grows in the story, and their relationship changes. And at some point, he even thinks it's over. But, fortunately, he's able to adapt, and so that he grows through the story. I think that's important.
Yes, I thought that was really important. The collective consciousness, by location. How do you describe things that, I don't want to say they're not of this world, but I guess transcendental is the best way to describe it. But but to try and, you know, get us to accept it in a sense. What kind of challenge was that for you?
Well, I wanted the main character. He was very resistant. He's very science oriented, very logical, very rational. And I think one of the keys, one of the things in this book I was trying to do was to show how that kind of rational science has a stranglehold on us. It's materialistic viewpoint, and it doesn't make space for the mystery, for the unknown. And that unknown is out there. There's no question about it. And I experienced, when I was going through a depression in my early 20s, experienced different realms of reality. And it actually helped me. I see it now as kind of a spiritual initiation. Sometimes when we go through difficult things in our lives, it opens a doorway to something else if we're not fighting it. And in my case, I remembered, I was under the care of a therapist at the time who was wonderful, who was helping me. At the same time, I had this experience of seeing things so differently. I wasn't sure if they were, well, there was a remote body leaving the body. There were also some experiences that I guess would be maybe reincarnation experiences. But I just tried to keep an open mind. I remember when it was happening, I even said to myself, well, this must be a natural process. And it was actually a way that helped me break old ways of thinking and helped me to kind of view things in a fresh, kind of with a sense of openness. And it actually, I think, helped me in terms of the depression I was dealing with, to see that, you could be mired in all kinds of struggles on this material plane in this world, but that's not all we are, right? And so when you're able to kind of escape that, so I saw it as kind of a gift that I was given, and it helped me realize, it helped me, I think, get through the depression. But I also feel that no matter how many, you can go into meditative states, you can experience all different kinds of things out of this, material, sensory type world. But what's important for me is how do we act? How do we think? What do we do to reduce suffering in this world? That to me is what really matters. You could have all the visions in the world, but if you don't help reduce suffering here, it's you're not making the best use of it.
Well, so how do we do that? Mindfulness, I think that a lot of us still are like not quite sure what that means, and I remember, like, I think I know, like a lot of us think we know, but, I remember reading this thing about, and it was in a book written by a Tibetan Buddhist person. And it talked about how if you could reach a certain level of mindfulness, then you can absolutely avoid all kinds of problems. And I was just wondering, like, is that true? I mean, don't problems just sort of happen regardless of how mindful we are?
Problems are always going to happen, but how we react to those problems, I think maybe that is what he was trying to get to. So mindfulness can mean a lot of different things. And I've been teaching it for many, many years now, and I keep increasing my knowledge of what it means. I mean, if somebody really wants to learn, find a good teacher. I even wrote a book called Simply Mindful, a 7-week course and personal handbook for mindful living. So that really teaches mindfulness in a systematized way. But mindfulness, if you go back to the original meaning of sati, which is the Sanskrit word for mindfulness, the original meaning of that word was self-recollection and self-remembrance. So for me, it's kind of, how do we bring the fragmented parts of ourselves together? How do we find that sense of wholeness? And it also means remembering our ancestors, right? It's a broader meaning of mindfulness. And when you start to experience mindfulness, you don't have to be as reactive with things. So yes, there's going to be, I always say, if you have a human mind and you have a human body, well, you're going to experience loss. You're going to experience sadness. You're going to experience all different kinds of emotions. And it's not that we want to avoid those things, but how can we wisely deal with these things that happen to us? So mindfulness, its real purpose is not to make us like more productive. And you hear that kind of, oh, be mindful and get more done, whatever. But mindfulness its purpose is to reduce suffering. And so you can start to observe your mind. You can notice when you follow thoughts that might not be helpful for you. You know, we identify with a lot of our thoughts, but we have, you know, and I'd like to ask your audience to think about how many thoughts have you had today. Could you possibly count the number of thoughts you've had in a day?
No,
No,
not
because
me.
no, yeah. I mean, I think we have a minimum 20,000 thoughts or more a day. And how many of those thoughts tell you something really profound about who you are? I mean, a very small number. Most are habitual thoughts, maybe toxic thoughts, conditioned thoughts. Sometimes it's been found that if we're just sitting there, our mind will start spinning, and we'll just randomly have distressing thoughts. That's normal. So the mind creates it's like a movie projector, creates this incredible show. But you know that, you got to know you're in a movie theater, right?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Right? Yeah.
That's a great analogy.
So that makes all the difference.
You know, it's funny that there's this kind of one thing that happens in the book that I wanted to ask you about, since you have, experience working in a psychiatric hospital as a therapist, doctor. What happens to one of the characters in the book, Mason, I'm thinking of, and what struck me was this concept of the rich and the powerful being able to just, commit their troubled children, whether that's the best course of action for them or not. And, it's not the first time I've heard of that kind of thing happening. From your perspective, how often does that happen, and how easy is it to do? Can somebody just lock up a problem in their life like that?
Well, again, that's fiction. That's a fictional story.
Yeah.
And
I keep forgetting.
So I don't know if it's funny, because people have read that book and say, well, that's you're Dr. Banks. And I'm like, no, that's fiction. I mean, sure, I can't help but draw upon parts of my life and the therapy practice that he uses in the book. There are parts of things that I know about, but no, I don't personally know of a case where somebody was committed like that, but but it's conceivable that something like that, what happens in the story, could conceivably happen.
Yeah, I've heard about it where it's like, I'm in Texas, so who knows? Who knows what they do. But I mean, I've heard of like, that was like kind of a common practice, at least in the area of up here where I live in top of Texas.
I think years ago, it was much more likely that somebody had somebody in their family who was troubled, maybe experiencing schizophrenia or hearing voices or something, and they might be committed for a period of time, and they didn't have the kind of medications they have now, and so somebody could have ended up in kind of an institutionalized care situation. And and I think that even today it's possible for things like that to happen. Although I think hospitals today want to try to get people out and move them out into the world, whether it's to some place that they can still function. But I think in the story, somebody like Mason could have gotten stuck in a institutionalized kind of care situation, and that's what the doctor in the story is trying to save him from.
No, I found that very, very compelling and very believable. Because it's like, you hear things like, well, once you're in the system, you're, forget it. You're always in the system, the mental health system. And, what kind of treatment happens? Is it all just drugs in the kind of hospital that the characters are in the story? Or, we see also like art therapy and stuff. And I was wondering, like, how prevalent is that where that's offered to people at psychiatric
Yeah,
hospitals?
I think it is getting better, and there are different what are called creative art therapies or
Mm.
creative therapies now. There's art therapy, there's dance movement therapy, there's music therapy,
Oh,
and
wow.
a lot of psych centers now have gardens, so the patient go outside, and they have really beautiful gardens, and they're trying to make it so they have a chance to get exposed to these other modalities, right? Because
Mm.
not everybody is talk therapy isn't the best thing for everybody, right?
Mm.
And the other thing that you brought up a good point, Mary, about how easy it is just to somebody gets in the system and they're given a diagnosis, and that's one of the
Yeah.
things that I think is sometimes a problem, because I think a lot of times patients, they hear that diagnosis and they latch onto it. So, I mean, I've
Mm.
had people come to me and they, oh, I'm schizophrenic, or I'm a bipolar, or I'm a this, I'm a eating disorder, I'm a that. And well, hold just a minute. You're giving
Yeah.
somebody gave you a diagnosis, but now you're giving yourself a label and you're
You're
defining yourself by
identifying.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I had somebody who I worked with, her whole story changed. I remember she came in to see me and she had there was a history of depression in her family. I think her mother or grandfather was institutionalized. One of her
Mm.
parents actually committed suicide, and she was on medication since a very tender, in grade school up through her whole life.
Wow.
And when she came in to see me, she just said, "Well, I've got depression in my family. There's nothing I can do about it." It was a very fatalistic kind of
Right.
way of looking at it, right? Well, I started working with her on different tools, mindfulness tools, or ways of, watching your thoughts, and positive affirmation, different thing, gratitude, which is a selective
Yeah.
attention practice, kind of gets you out of your head, and you start to, it rewires your brain actually. So I had her start to do these practices. She started to feel better, and she's like, "Oh, wait, I want to go off my meds." And I was like, "Well, you don't be so fast to do that. Um, the medication might be helping you, and these other things are helping you." But eventually she did, and her story changed. It was from, I have this
Wow.
depression, so my family can't do anything about it, to I have a set of skills and tools
Yeah.
that I can use to manage my depression. It was
Mm.
beautiful to see that shift in how she
Wow.
saw her story.
Well, you know what that reminds me of, and it's related to the book. I'm not going off too far in a tangent, but um, like I studied, shamanic practices, and one thing that a lot of teachers teach in that modality, you could say, um, is that we are not our stories. That we do get too attached to our stories, and that's what it reminded me of, which reminds me of Traveler Jackie in your book. She's like a shaman of some sort. Did you have somebody in your life like that, or how did you even come up with it?
Well, it's
Like
funny.
her.
I mean, no, I didn't have anybody exactly like her. I had, it was interesting. I had met a traveler who had a dog who was on
Mm.
his shoulder. I was leaving the library one day and I saw this guy, and I thought I saw something on his shoulder, and I started talking to him, and he called himself a traveler. Now, not
Wow.
the same kind of traveler as Jackie. Traveler Jackie's a kind of shamanic traveler and teacher. And this guy called himself a traveler because he didn't stay in any place very long, and his dog that stayed on his shoulder wasn't a sentient canine like Traveler Jackie's canine. But that kind of stuck with me, how interesting that was, and
Yeah.
how he survived, and um, I had a nice long talk with him, and that was years ago. And then when I finally started to work on this book, it was like, boom, I was like, that popped into my head as Traveler
Yeah.
Jackie. But
Maybe that's why you met him.
it could be, it's amazing to think that, because I wanted this book to feel real and organic, not formulaic at all. So I wanted the people to come alive, and sometimes that's kind of dangerous as a writer. You can write yourself into a corner, but I just trusted my characters.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned, some people saying, "Oh, this must be about you." Maybe that's because you wrote it in the first person, But that I so enjoyed that, and I was just wondering, why did you choose that point of view if it wasn't going to be too biographical? And did you take on the character of Ben?
Well, I didn't take on the character Ben, but I just, for some reason, I felt that he had this story to tell, and he wanted to share the story directly, because he was taking on this journey. And I mean, a third person narrator couldn't have done it as well as I don't think he did.
No, I agree. I really do. And I think, again, it goes back to the love story. It's so great to hear the male point of view in that kind of situation. I don't know why, but that really stuck with me. I'm like, wow, how many women are in that kind of universe? And they're like, so that's how he's thinking. That's one thing that popped up with me. But, I did want to ask another mindfulness question, though.
Yeah.
Because reading your background, your bio and stuff, you've done a lot with the concept of mindful eating. Now, does that mean staring at my vegetables, or what does that mean? How do I eat mindfully?
Mindful eating, I think, means to be aware of your hunger sensations, right? To experience the food fully, not to just gulp it down, but to be present as you eat, and to notice and appreciate the wonder of food. I mean, here's a miracle, that food comes in all these different sources, and how intimate can you get? You're putting something in your mouth that becomes part of you. It's absorbed into you. I mean, you can't really get more intimate than that. So to help people, and I used to be a mindless eater, which is, I think, what drew me to, I was a vice president of the Center for Mindful Eating at one point, but that probably never would have happened if I'd been a mindful eater early on. I was a mindless eater. I was an emotional eater. And I never forget, I was a lady that I worked with, and she would go to drive-ins, and she had a feeling that she didn't like, and she wanted it to go away. So she'd go to a drive-through, food place, and order copious amounts of food, like 2,000, 3,000 calories worth of food, and then just eat it in the parking lot, and it made her made those feelings go away.
Eating her feelings.
Yeah. Is it, is it what I'm eating, or is it what's eating me? Right. Yeah. So what I had her do, I said, before you go through the drive-through, if you drive up to, you drive up there, I want you to stop in your car and not order until you can give a name to the feeling that you're trying to make go away. And she said, oh yeah, I don't know what I've never given it a name. So she came back, and it was amazing. A little lozenge there for the throat. So it was amazing. She said, I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes, and I suddenly realized what I was feeling was loneliness. And once I gave it a name, she said, I realized it's not physical hunger. I don't need to go through the drive-through now. She just drove home. It was a beautiful story of, so when we get into the body, which is what mindfulness can help us do, you can start to feel your feelings better. And that can be really be a guide in a lot of ways. So mindful eating is about being present with what you're feeling, and being aware of your hunger. Because if you're really, I try to get people to notice their hunger on a 1 to 10 scale. So 10, I'm so hungry I just eat anything I see. 1, I don't really feel any hunger. So it's best to try to eat when your hunger is in the 4, 5, 6 range. You're more likely to make better choices. So mindful eating is about choice. It's about noticing your emotions, about appreciating the food. It's all of that.
Can it help with like eating disorders?
Yeah. I mean, there actually is some research about that too, about mindful eating and how it can help people deal with eating disorders. And I worked in an eating disorder clinic. It's a
Wow.
challenge. It's a challenge. Talk about, they have about 95% of the time they're preoccupied with thoughts about body image and eating, and very
Yeah.
hard for them to emotionally regulate, but it takes time if you're experiencing
Yeah.
that.
Look, you have the most fascinating background ever.
Oh, well,
You wrote
thank
this,
you.
you wrote this wonderful book, all this stuff. And also you were a monk. You were a monk, an actual monk. And
I
I
still
was,
have the hairstyle.
yeah. Well, like, is that any fun? I mean, like, like what, why? Like,
Well,
because it's not something that people, we don't live in a society that's like encouraging, like, hey, be a monk.
yeah, I met this monk. There was somebody I knew who said, "Oh, there's somebody I want you to meet, this monk that I've met." I was like, "Okay." So I met this monk, and I didn't know it at the time. He was from Burma, and he was a well-known teaching monk, came and taught all around the US. But what struck me was the sense of openness and availability and compassion that I literally could feel from him. I mean, I grew up in Chicago. You didn't find people like that. And
Yeah.
I was like really curious. And not too much, some months later, I went through a difficult time in my life. And there were certain patterns that kept repeating for me. And I'm sure your listeners can, we all have blind spots. We all have sometimes patterns that repeat, and
Yeah.
they can be harmful and painful. And so it was happened again to me. I was like, you know what? I've got to dig deeper. I've got to find out, why is this happening and what can I do about it? And it's around that time I found out that I could ordain in the monastery with that teacher as the head of the monastery. And
Oh, wow.
it was a real blessing for me. I mean, I was ripe, I think, for the experience. And I went in knowing I wouldn't be there forever or anything like that. I've always thought my work would be out here, but it put my life into a different trajectory, Mary. As a result of that, I ended up going back to graduate school to become a
Wow.
psychotherapist, and I started writing mindfulness-oriented work, and became more focused on what I could give and how I might be of service. So it was a life-changing experience. I'm very grateful for it. And yeah, it was hard too, to be in there where you were doing very intensive meditation and things I had never done to that extent. In fact, when you go in, they give you a new name. You kind of let go of your old life. And I had a lot of hair when I went in. And so the first thing they do is they get straight razors and they shave your hair.
Ah,
And yeah, and they give you a new name.
I'm
And the
out of
name
it then. I'm not shaving my head.
and then but the first lesson it was funny. They held up a lock of my hair and held it in front of me. And I'm thinking like, well, what's this about? And then the monk asked, he says, "This is not you." So it's about not identifying with non-attachment, not learning not to identify, and to see yourself in a new way. And it was
Like sort of shedding that old you.
shedding the old persona. And
Wow.
so
Did
it
you
was
learn
very
to
powerful.
levitate?
No,
We hear about, Tibetan monks and, all
yeah,
kinds of like
we didn't do
wild.
that in that monastery. They were it was the old school of Buddhism, the Theravada school known as. So that's in Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Burma. And so they it's more just, you're sitting and walking meditation and sitting meditation, different kinds of meditation as well.
Yeah.
And then, they would have different talks that the monk would give. Fortunately, most of it was in English. He was Burmese, but But it was a really powerful experience for me. Even, I kind of noticed we would go in to have lunch, and on the walls of the dining room were signs that said "Noble Silence." So we ate in silence. But
Wow.
at the same time, it was amazing. People were so attentive. So I might finish eating my bowl, and then as soon as I finished, there was a monk's holding up another bowl of rice or a dish for me. So everybody was very present with what was happening, even though we were silent. And I think it's a good experience just to try to eat the first 5 minutes of a meal, for example, just in silence. In fact, you probably remember in the book, in Travelers, everybody's trying to get the psychiatrist to be still, to get silent. And he's filling up his mind all the time because he doesn't want to confront his grief. He doesn't want to confront his feelings. So he stays distracted with all these things. He's reading journals, he's doing this, he's doing that, and he's not reflecting. And I think that's something that we kind of lost nowadays. And I hope that this book can connect people with that idea of stillness. And that when we access stillness, we can also access other ways of awareness and transcendental awareness outside of this one reality that we experience.
Yeah. No, I think that is really, that would be helpful. If we had more people that were aware, or even self-aware, that'd be very helpful. With things like depression and PTSD and I guess like, is mindfulness something that can be helpful across the board, or are there people that like can't do it? Do you know what I'm saying?
And I think mindfulness tends to be pretty helpful, but it's like anything. It's not for everybody. It's like penicillin isn't good for every
I'm allergic.
problem. Okay, there's a perfect example. Some people might be allergic to mindfulness.
Right.
So a lot of times I try to take mindfulness out of the box, though, and I don't need to use the mindfulness word. One time I was teaching in Hawaii, and a lady came up to me in the middle at a break time, and she said, she was Hawaiian, and she said, "Oh, we have a word here in our native language for that I think is like mindfulness." And she said it's nalu. And nalu means not too fast, not too slow, in the flow. And isn't that beautiful? Yeah. So I think that however people connect with getting present, and some people do it visually, some are tactile, so maybe they get present when they go on a walk. Other people get present when they look at nature. So it's kind of like knowing ourselves. And so everybody has a different way, and traditional, breath mindfulness might not be for everybody. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, it's something that, like, I think everybody's got like a little bit of their, a different vibe sometimes. I mean, I know some people like, that are very active or whatever. It's like, I can't imagine them being silent. I can't imagine, but they've got their own, sort of level of activity or level of energy that seems to keep them in the flow. So I was just wondering, like, is it nothing is a one size fit all? And that's true for even therapy. And you're working psychotherapist. Are you Freud or Jung or, what's your approach? How do you describe your practice?
It's really interesting. And I think the most important thing is the relationship you have with the client. I think that's more important than the modality, the kind of therapy you use. But is there a rapport? Do you really connect with them? I think some of the moments I had with, and actually that's in the book, there was a moment when Ben and Mason share laughter, breaks a very tense moment, and they laugh together. And that there was a young man I worked with, and maybe it came from that, but I remember we had a moment where we both started laughing. We both really just cracked up laughing. And I think that was probably one of the most therapeutic moments we had together.
Laughter, the best medicine.
Yeah, it really is a good medicine. Yeah.
Well, one thing I thought like right at and I don't even know, maybe it was chapter 2. It was towards the beginning of the book. In the way that you describe people, you know, like I just thought to myself, like, he really likes people. And I thought about it. You've got to like people, right? To be a
Oh
psychotherapist who
yeah,
wants to hear
yeah.
their problems all the time. But in the way that you describe the character, I thought of, and maybe this is like, maybe I'm getting the meaning wrong, but I thought of it as like it was sort of mindful. It was you were
Mm.
noticing like these aspects of these characters, like the minor characters in the book, and like they deserve to be given that attention. And that just made me think, like, you're a people person.
Well,
And I
thank
don't
you,
think
thank you. I guess maybe that is what came through from me, because when I like to, I try to be observant, and I
Mhm.
think everybody has strengths, and I try to, even if I'm just about my day, I try to point out people's strengths to them. And well, you were very much of a people person too, Mira. I can see that, and you're
A little bit.
wanted to help people, and I could feel your compassionate sense. So I
Oh,
mean,
thanks.
well, I'm glad that came through. Thank you. I'm touched that you saw that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I just really kind of thought that right off the bat, like like chapter 2, I think. I can't remember. I didn't write down the page number for it. But so, just so everybody knows, the book, the title is Travelers, and by Donald Altman, out from Roundfire Books, distributed by John Hunt Publishing, available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all your favorite book retailers. Thank you so much for taking the time to share, the journey of this book and your insights with us today, Donald.
Oh, thank you, Mary. Very much appreciate it, and thanks for having me on your show.